2, 1. My name is Scott, and I'm named for my mother's favorite student. I was raised in the Midwest on a farm where corn is king. Studied in Chicago, music, then wrote my doctoral dissertation in Sweden, learned Swedish fluently. My last name makes it clear why I love it there. Studied some more in Cambridge, Mass. My parents thought that was enough. So I got my first teaching job at a New England boarding school, then an all-girls school in the nation's capital, and then at the best school in the world, with the best teachers in the world and the best students in the world. I like reading, exercising, walking our dogs, and occasionally attending a great musical conducted by my former student. Do you remember my former student standing next to me here? That's Kurt. He's the music director and conductor at Hamilton on Broadway in New York City. Remember, he and Carlos visited PBS in October, did a Hamilton sing-along, taught master classes on musical theater. He helped build your excitement for the performing arts. That's Kurt and me last Saturday on his Hamilton stage in New York. The hour before, I saw Hamilton for the very first time. I start by telling my story, and my story about seeing Hamilton because of today's topic. Today's topic is respect. Respect begins by respecting each person, respecting who they are as beautiful individuals, respecting where they come from, respecting their varied opinions, respecting what makes them tick, and most importantly, respecting their stories, listening to each other's stories and respecting their stories. Now, I was impressed with Kurt's Broadway Hamilton team. I met several of them backstage before the show. The show tells the story of Alexander Hamilton. At the end, the musical encourages us to tell our story. And our story includes the good and the bad, just like for Alexander Hamilton. Now, before the show, Kurt told me this. He said, night after night, we tell Hamilton's story the best we can. Night after night, we tell Hamilton's story the best we can. Now that's respect. The starting point for respect is you have to tell your story and you need to listen to each other's stories. Now the second way to show respect, I think, is to be curious. There is something very respectful when we are curious about other people, about who they are and how they think, what makes them tick. Being curious puts the other person first, ahead of you. Now, I know that you're curious people, and there's a lot for me to be curious about when I visit my family back in Iowa. You may remember my visit back to Iowa 2 years ago, just 48 hours after that very stressful presidential election. Almost getting to my parents' farm, I saw a huge sign in the corner of my dad's cornfield. It was a political banner, and on that banner was the name of the presidential candidate that I didn't vote for. I was so stunned that I almost drove off the road into the ditch. I found out that my cousin put that sign there. She lives right across the road from my parents in the adjacent farm. My cousin and I have never, ever voted for the same president. We approach our spirituality very differently. We disagree about almost everything. All this, despite the fact that we were raised in the same Swedish immigrant community only 3 miles apart on Iowa farms. Now, despite our differences, my cousin is curious about me, and I am curious about her. She is curious about what I think, and I am curious about what she thinks. She asks me curious questions about my life, and I ask my cousin curious questions about her life. Now, sometimes my cousin will say something, and I'm tempted to stomp my foot and tell her how much I disagree, how much I hate what she says. I desperately want to offer my opinion. I want to show her that I'm right and she's wrong. And I think that's true. But at the end of the day, my friends, what good would that do? What good would it do? Nothing. So, a plant. So instead, I asked my cousin a simple question that I'm recommending for you today. Here's the question. Can you tell me more about that? That's a question for being curious. Can you tell me more about that? Not making an opinion, not telling her I disagree, just tell me more about that. So imagine this on an Iowa farm, my cousin and me being curious rather than being right. Choosing to be curious rather than choosing to be right. Now, my sister has told me that she cannot understand how in the world my cousin and I can get along so well with so many disagreements. I'll tell you how. We're curious. We tell our stories. We listen to each other's stories. We have opinions, but it's not necessary to share them all the time. We want to take a stand, but we don't have to do it every time. And I can guarantee you, my cousin and I both love to be right. But what good is it to be right all being alone, all by myself, being right in my own opinions? What good does it do to be alone? So, my friends, in 2019, I want you to know this. I respect all of you. I respect every single one of you. And I know that you respect me too. You may have been hoping this morning that my talk on respect would be more blunt. Something like this. Do this and don't do that, and that's respect. Or, here are the rule books for respect. Or here are the rules you can follow, and that means that you're doing respect. But here's the problem, my friends, big problem. Respect is not a rule book. It is much deeper than do this, do that. It is not a bunch of easy to follow guidelines and rules. Real respect is hard. It's hard work. It takes time to build, and there's no easy rule book for it. For us to respect each other, we need to start somewhere. Tell your story. Listen to each other's stories. Be curious. Now, I admit, it's very hard to be curious over and over and over and over again. We would rather just state our case. We would rather just be right and move on. It can feel hard to respect someone whose opinion you don't like, whose story you don't understand, or whose beliefs you don't agree with. But know this, the PBS mission tells us that we must respect the uniqueness of each person. We must respect the uniqueness of each person. So what do we do about this at PBS? I propose this. Tell your story, listen to each other's stories, and be really, really curious. Thank you.